Our presenter, Harry Moser, is an inductee to Industry Week's Manufacturing Hall of Fame for 2010. He is Quality Magazine's Professional of the Year for 2012. He has participated actively in President Obama's January 11, 2012 Insourcing Forum at the White House. He has testified at a March 28, 2012 congressional hearing on reshoring and manufacturing. He is the winner of a January 2013 online written reshoring offshoring debate in The Economist. He has a 45-year career in manufacturing. He worked for GF Aggie Charmy, which is an EDM and high-speed milling machine tool company. He was president in 1985. He retired in December 31, 2010 as chairman emeritus. On the board, he is on the board of NIMS, or NIMS, which have the credentials for skilled manufacturing, and president of SMTS, Swiss Machine Tool Society. He is the retired president of ISTMA Americas. He has a BS in mechanical engineering and an MS in engineering from MIT. He has an MBA from the University of Chicago. And most relevant and something that I think is very exciting is he is the founder and president of the Reshoring Initiative. May I present Harry Moser?
So for all those in attendance, I'm delighted to be here, and I look forward to communicating with you, giving you some information, and then taking your questions and any suggestions that you can give us. So the title is To Offshore or Reshore, Bringing Manufacturing Jobs Back to the U.S. Normally I call it To Offshore or Reshore, How to Objectively Decide. So we don't in any sense say that all work should come back, all manufacturing work today comes back. We say that we suggest or we ask that companies do a better job of evaluating what should be offshore and what should be here. And we believe that when they do a more informed, a more detailed analysis, they will conclude that a substantial portion of what has been offshored will come back. And we ask them to do that in their own self-interest, primarily, because they'll be more profitable, more successful, larger companies if they bring at least a portion of what's offshore back today. So first, a couple of some definitions: reshoring, backshoring, onshoring, insourcing. There's probably 10 other terms: right shoring, home shoring, all kinds of words. And they're all related to bringing back to the home country, in most of our cases the U.S. or North America, the manufacture of products that will be sold, assembled, used here. So we don't in any sense suggest that U.S. should make toasters and ship them to India or China. But in the same sense, we believe that economics shows that most companies will be more profitable if they make all or most of their products here in the United States or in North America. A very similar logic applies to transplants. So the most visible transplants are companies like Toyota, Honda, Mercedes, building factories here in the U.S. to supply the U.S. automobile market. And why do they build those factories here? Because it's more profitable for them to make the car here than to make it in Japan or Germany or somewhere and ship it here. And so why does GE decide to make appliances here instead of in China? Because it's more profitable to make it here near the consumer. So they're both following exactly the same logic. Caterpillar refers to it as localization. So putting most of their factories in the market where the product will be sold, and having that factory primarily, but not exclusively, producing for that local market. So the material that I'm presenting has several possible uses. First, its obvious use and that it was developed for is sourcing decisions. So for an OEM or a big company that has to decide, where am I going to have the whole product made, here or offshore, or where am I going to get components? It's a sourcing decision. For a distributor that has to decide, where am I going to get my material from that I'm going to sell to other companies? it can be a sourcing decision because roughly the same logic applies. For, say, a contract manufacturer, they might not offshore too much, but for example, a molder or a stamper might get molds or dies from offshore. So even they have the chance to use this in sourcing decisions. And then for selling your domestically made product versus imports, and to motivate your customers to not assemble products offshore or to reshore the assembly of the products, because when they do that, they're going to need more parts, more tools, more something from you. So I have to remember to go down too. So this is describing the flawed company economic model. And so a lot of the offshoring occurred because the majority of companies did not do a good job on analyzing the cost of offshoring. They looked at simple measures such as wage or price, the purchase price of the product, or landed cost, maybe total landed cost. And so examples of that would be, for wage arbitrage, Jack Welch very famously said maybe 20 years ago that he'd like to place his factories on barges and move the barges to the country that has the lowest wages and sufficient skill. And then when the wages got up too high, he'd move the barge to the next country and work his way down the chain. And so it never happened, but that I think exemplifies the concept. Purchase price variance is to have the supply chain manager have say a market basket of goods that they're buying, 1,000 of this, 1,000,000 of that, what have you. Last year that basket cost $100 million, and that individual's job is to drive that down to 90 or 95. And so they look at the price, but they ignore all kinds of other costs. And their silos taken care of, but the whole company organization is not optimizing. A little bit better is landed cost, probably price duty-free packaging. They're getting a little better. Some people talk about total landed cost, might add in a few more costs. So you might have 6 costs altogether considered, whereas our total cost of ownership software or analysis would deal with 29 different costs, and therefore a lot of costs that almost none of the companies look at. And so typically these companies are missing 20, 25% of the total cost, and when they do that, they're inevitably making some wrong decisions. So in addition to many companies having not done their homework properly, the times have changed. So you can see here a chart that shows indexed unit labor costs in selected countries. So it's indexed for all countries to 100 in 2000. You can see the trend coming up to 2013. And by indexed unit labor costs, they mean changes in the dollar value of the wages, which is the wage in the local currency adjusted for the currency exchange rate, and then a further adjustment for productivity changes in each of the countries. So you can see for the U.S. it's essentially flat at 100. So what that means that we've had roughly 2% wage increases and roughly 2% productivity increases, so it stayed at 100. Whereas for China, which is the 800-pound gorilla in offshoring, that 100 has gone up to about 320, 330. And that means that the cost of the labor content of the average manufactured product coming out of China is now about 3.2, 3.3 times as high as it was back in 2000. So it's gone from a very low level to a meaningful level. Still not as high as the U.S. in absolute terms, but the trend is definitely there. And the trend is almost surely going to continue because the two things that have driven the trend, first the one-child policy, which was put in place in China about 35 years ago, and so the cohort of workers 35 years and less is a half or a third of what it would have traditionally been. And the supply of labor has come down dramatically. In fact, their workforce dropped by about 3.5 million last year and will drop by about 3.5 million every year going forward. And at the same time, the demand for labor has gone up dramatically because their standard of living is rising at 6, 7, 8% a year. And so they're demanding more services, more products, et cetera. They've had a very high savings rate, and they'll eventually start to have a higher consumption rate, and as that happens, they'll demand more things. So if you have a dramatic rise in the demand for labor and a dramatic reduction of the supply of labor, then the price of labor inevitably goes up. So this is focused mainly on Boston Consulting Group, which has forecast a renaissance in manufacturing in the U.S., and they've said specifically that they expect what they call net labor cost for manufacturing in China and the U.S. to converge by around 2015. And so what they did not say that they expect the wage rates per hour to converge. But what they said was the material cost is roughly the same everywhere. Steel, aluminum, copper, oil, plastics, about the same per pound in the raw state. And so you have to then look at the conversion of that raw material into the end product. And that in say 2000, the Chinese wage was so small that you almost didn't have to measure it. But now it's substantially higher relative to the U.S. wage, and the average productivity in China is about a third of the U.S. You have to measure their cost per hour by about 3 to get their unit labor cost, and what BCG has said that unit labor cost will get close enough to the U.S. unit labor cost by about 2015, so that the remaining gap will be more than offset by all the other costs associated with offshoring. So BCG said, take a hard look at the total cost, and that's what that we help you do with our total cost of ownership estimator. This Michelle Wyoka from the New York Times said that the Chinese were no longer just thankful not to go hungry. So where 50 years ago with Mao and Chiang Kai-shek, they were happy to be alive, and now with their standard of living coming up, they're not worried about being alive anymore. They're not even worried so much about being hungry, but they're starting to go on the internet and see how well your work, how well you live, and your employees live, and they say they want that too. So they're working their way up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that's good for them because they're getting a better living standard, and that makes us relatively more competitive. So this slide describes what the Reshoring initiative provides. So we have this free total cost of ownership estimator. Right? I'll refer to it as TCO. So it's online on our website, and any company can go in and use it, big companies, small, what have you, distributors, et cetera. And you answer a series of questions. What's the price here and what's the price there? And when I say price, it could be your standard cost of production. So what is it you consider your cost to be at the manufacturing level? And then you answer a series of other questions, and it calculates the duty and the freight and the packaging and the carrying cost of inventory and the travel cost to check on the supplier, the intellectual property risk, the impact of separating engineering from manufacturing, that impact on innovation, and a series of other factors. And what essentially what it helps you do is see whether the increase in manufacturing costs, which typically will happen when you shift from, say, China or India to the U.S., whether that increase in manufacturing cost is offset by a reduction in overhead, such as carrying cost of inventory, travel costs, warranty costs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have an online library of currently about 425 reshoring articles. We've just completely rebuilt the library. I hope in a couple of weeks it'll be reissued, and then we'll start to repopulate it and get up to about 600 reshoring articles. And you could go in there and say, in my state or my industry, who has brought work back and why and from where and how did it go for them? And then so you can see what your competitors did, or you could see what your prospective customers have done, or what the competitors of your prospective customers have done. If the competitor has started buying castings again here and you supply castings, then you could go to your customer and say, look, your competitor's bringing that kind of work back. Let's see if I can meet your needs here. We have a case studies template in which you can go in and report your reshoring case, you as an OEM or you as a supplier, you as a distributor. And you fill out a PDF. It tells the story about a company bringing work back from a country for reasons, and it identifies the the company, the technology used to make it, whatever you want to put in there, links and logos, creates a PDF that you can post and we post. And in addition, if you do that, you get a free Manufacturing is Cool t-shirt, which you would be proud to wear. Notice the last item on this slide, motivation for skilled manufacturing careers. Almost daily we read about the shortage of tool makers, precision machinists, chemical technicians, whatever that skilled technologist is in your industry. And it's not surprising because the typical smart high school student has heard so much about offshoring and post-industrial society, and their uncle lost the job at the mill and can't find one or hasn't found one. And so they say to themselves, why would I want to do that? Why would I want to take years getting trained to do that if there aren't going to be any jobs when I get done with the training? Why don't I become a teacher or a lawyer or a doctor or something else that seems like it's going to stay on? And so for reshoring to succeed, recruiting has to do better. We have to have more and smarter and better trained recruits coming into manufacturing. But for recruiting to happen, society has to see that reshoring is succeeding. They have to see that the work is coming back so the guidance counselor can recommend it, the superintendent can reinstate the training program, and the student can decide that that's a good one for them. So this total cost of ownership system, you put it, you answer all these questions. This is just a very, maybe half or a third of the kinds of questions you have to answer. The case I'm going to very quickly go through is a Chinese price of 70, a U.S. price of 100. That's dollars per unit, 12,000 units a year, and then a lot of other data that would be used to calculate duty, freight, and things like that. And so you put in all this kind of data, and the system automatically generates a chart that looks something like this. So you can see the red dot is the Chinese unit price. The blue triangle is the U.S. unit price, so 70 and 100. So typically the supply chain manager, the purchasing agent, will look at this and say, $30 difference, 30% difference, 12,000 units a year, so $360,000 of price variance if I have the work done in China or wherever it is instead of here. And that's a third of my objective. I'm going to make my bonus. Of course, we'll send it off there. But if we can get that individual to look at the total cost of ownership, the TCO, and see that it's about 98 for China and 108 for the U.S., so now it's only 10% difference. And using a conservative assumption about Chinese wages expressed in dollars, in this case assuming 15% instead of the traditional 18%, and using 3% for the U.S., so again, sort of a higher than historical, then the individual would see that in about 3 years, the Chinese total cost of ownership is higher than for the U.S. because of that wage cost changing. And therefore, hopefully, the individual would say, wow, I should not send any more categories of work abroad, and I should start getting our company to expand, to buy more machinery, to hire and train, or to go out and look for suppliers that will do that and will be available to sell to us and supply us as it becomes strategically essential to bring the work back over the next couple of years. So I would assume some of you are lean, or at least know what lean is, and Deming, who basically got it all started in his Out of the Crisis, his fourth key principle said, end the practice of awarding business on the basis of price tag, instead minimize total cost. And so it's very simple, and it's very clear, it's obvious. Why would anyone think of doing anything other than minimizing total cost? But almost all the big companies that brag about their lean programs don't minimize total cost. They look price, they look at some other simpler, less objective measure. And the current most famous people in the field, like Womack and Shook, they'll frequently write articles about companies should do the math. Why won't companies do the math? Saying that when the companies do the math, they often conclude that some or all of the work should come back. So speaking of lean, I made a list here of the 7 Toyota wastes And that's how most companies work their lean program. They find ways to minimize the Toyota wastes. And I've listed how offshoring makes those wastes worse. And so at your leisure, you can go over this and see if some of these would apply to your situation or your customer's situation. Inventory is the obvious one to, I think, to attack. This is a list of or logos of a broad range of reshorers. And you can see at the top a lot of big companies like Apple and Motorola, now part of Google, GE, and then some smaller OEMs, Electrolux, people like that, Master Lock, but also some contract manufacturers, some suppliers. So the W in the middle right, Engineered Plastics, is an injection molder out in Santa Rosa, California. They've done a lot of reshoring work. Ace Clearwater Enterprises on the left is a metal fabricator for the aerospace industry. So, and I put those in especially to emphasize that the supplier is just as much part of the reshoring team as the OEM that finally makes the decision to reshore. So this is the famous GE water heater case, and they brought back a range of appliances, water heaters, refrigerators, etc., from Louisville to Kentucky. Most of the publicity has been about the water heaters, and they brought 1,300 jobs back, spent $800 million on this facility, and this is at Appliance Park, which they had, prior to this happening, they'd almost given up on. They tried to sell the division, and this is a huge place. It used to have 25,000 workers. It was like a city. It has traffic lights in the parking lot to give you a feeling for the volume that was going on there at one time. But it had almost died, and now they've had a great resurgence with this. And the two items in red, I think, are especially important. One, the impact on innovation of keeping manufacturing and engineering together. They had been making these water heaters in China. They brought the manufacturer back here. Before they started it up here, they had the product design, the design engineers, the manufacturing engineers, the foremen, the workers, all together in a war room. They tore the product apart, and they improved the design. They improved it so much that the thermal efficiency improved, so it became a better product. The warranty cost came down, so a more reliable product, and the cost came down so much despite the higher U.S. labor rates. The cost came down so much that the retail price for the U.S.-made product is 20% lower than for the Chinese-made product. So it was just a wonderful win-win-win. Finally, they noted that the manufacturing cost, the standard cost in the U.S. was still higher than for the Chinese product, but when they looked at all the costs, something like our total cost of ownership system, when they looked at all the costs, they were able to sell the product at a lower consumer price here in the U.S. So I think this is just a wonderful example of what GE has done here. Motorola, again, part of Google, brought back this Moto X, which is their top-end smartphone, and they're having it built in what used to be Nokia's cell phone factory in Fort Worth by Flextronics. They already have 2,000 or so employees. I think they're over 2,000. They are also trying to attract their Asian suppliers as an ecosystem, because a lot of the components for any of these products are produced in Asia. And it'll be a lot more economic, a lot more efficient, shorter supply chain, the whole thing, if they can get the Asian suppliers to relocate to Texas, somewhere near their facility, so that they can have just-in-time delivery into the factory. In addition, they had other reasons, like are shown at the bottom. So very big news. This is, I think, right at the head of everything that's happening. Walmart, which hasn't been sort of a U.S. product company stalwart for some time, announced a $50 billion increase in U.S. product buy over the next 10 years. So they're going to buy an additional $5 billion per year of U.S.-made product. And I attended their U.S. Manufacturing Summit in Orlando about a month and a half ago, and it was incredible. They had 500 suppliers. They had Jeff Immelt from GE, Secretary of Commerce Pritzker, 9 governors, et cetera, et cetera. And they were letting these suppliers know that they've got to start making more of the product here in the U.S. I'm really impressed by Walmart's commitment to this. They've been so visible and public about it that they're going to have to make it succeed. And I'm working with one of the companies now, one of the suppliers now, to help them decide how to do it. And if any of you are Walmart suppliers or would like to be Walmart suppliers, we could help you do the analysis to figure out how you can meet Walmart's price objectives, but also make the product here in the U.S. One thing I'm especially impressed by Walmart is that they went to this 1888 Mills company, which makes towels, and they asked them for lots of towels. I'm thinking $100 million a year or something like that, just lots and lots of towels. And the company said, no, we can't make that many for you. We don't have the capacity. And so Walmart gave them a long-term commitment, a long-term contract, so the company could go out and get the capital and feel comfortable investing in the factory to make the towels here in the United States to satisfy Walmart's needs. So I thought that was a great partnership of Walmart with the supplier. Now, this is Redding is a truck body manufacturer in Pennsylvania, and they brought back truck parts from China, and things just weren't working right. This organization, ability to respond to the customer, travel costs, they said now they have control of their destiny. So interesting case here, this Dazor, which makes lighting systems, and they had outsourced offshore the majority of their production, and they had all kinds of issues with inventory, communication, quality, lead time. Prices were going up, all the things that we've heard about, and they've reshored a substantial portion of that, brought back about 90% of the offshored parts. So I think that was wonderful. And specifically this PC.
Hey, Harry?
Yes?
Hey, it's Ian. Can I jump in on the Dazor one real quick?
That's perfect, yeah.
Wonderful. Guys, for those who don't know me, this is Ian Cresswell. I'm with Passport. I'm the manufacturing product manager. Dazor is kind of near and dear to us because that's actually a client of ours. And it's a really interesting circumstance because they actually were already outsourcing when we started working with them. There's actually a great success story on them coming on our website. But what had happened was they were in a situation where they realized that they weren't a great manufacturer of the small stuff. They were an excellent designer and sales arm for the devices that they were bringing to market, and decided to outsource the production. Found that China was the cheapest way to do it, moved all the stuff over there, and then realized a lot of what Harry's been talking about. Frankly, I go back to the chart that he showed us earlier, where the costs in China have increased 300%. Over this period of time. Well, that's exactly what he saw happen, and it's funny because I've had the conversation with the owner of Dazor. He's a great guy. He actually wanted to be with us today, couldn't, had a personal commitment he had to deal with. He's told me some of the stories that he went through in the time from when we started working with him through today, and what they realized as they moved through this process, that the real cost of this product was just, it was horrendous. When they had problems, you're stuck with it. Get a bad product, you're stuck with it. Hopefully they get it right the next time. Reshored, and his statement to me was most of his suppliers now are within 40 to 60 miles, as I recall, of his facility. And when he does have a problem, if it's a consistent problem, he can go sit down with the owner of his client or of his vendor and put the product on his desk, look him in the eye and say, hey, this is not acceptable. What are we going to do about it? And that brought a lot of value. And the last thing I'll add to this, his suppliers kept bugging him from China, asking if they could requote. So he finally said, yeah, go ahead. And I believe this took place in the last 8 months or so. Go ahead, requote. Well, he got his quotes back. Hard costs. I'm talking about the product costs, not all the factoring that comes into dealing with the additional costs of bringing it from overseas and handling costs. These problem costs, you have to anticipate that in your costs, as Harry will point out to you. But they ended up coming in slightly higher than he's paying right now for the same product that he used to get done over there, that he's now having made, within a stone's throw of his facility, and he's not dealing with all the headaches. It was pretty amazing. It was just to see some of this stuff from the seat that I get to sit in is really kind of cool, and it's actually one of the reasons that Harry is with us today. I'm sorry for co-opting your presentation, but I couldn't help myself with the Dazor thing, Harry.
Oh, Ian, you enriched the presentation. Thank you. So,
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the slide I've got up now is this PC Production Castings Inc., and they were one of the suppliers of Dazor, and you know, again, that illustrates that the supplier is part of that reshoring process. Bailey Hydropower makes hydraulic cylinders, was making them in India, brought them back to Tennessee, and I think most interesting, before when they'd open a container, and if some of them were bad, they'd think, well, I've got another container a week behind that, another one a week behind that. They got this, you know, sort of domino thing coming across the ocean, and they say each of the containers is buried in a container ship, and I got no way of knowing whether those parts are good or bad. And if we're already in trouble because this batch is bad, if the next one's bad, we're really, you know, we're going to lose our customers. So do you sit and wait and see if the next container is good, or do you fly to India, fix the process, and start air freighting parts over, even though it might be that the next container has good parts in it, and you just spent on air freight more than your margin on a month's worth of parts. You know, and there's no way to solve the problem because you cannot get into the container and find out whether the ones on those various container ships are good or bad. So, whereas if you're making them yourself, or if someone's making them for you 50 miles, 100 miles, even 1,000 miles away in the U.S., the same day you can get there, you can understand what the problem is, you can fix it. Maybe you lost 2 days of scrap, but now you know what you have and you've solved the problem. So you can eliminate uncertainty, because uncertainty is caused by lack of knowledge, because you can't get knowledge of what's in the supply chain. Scoville brought back buttons. And buttons sounds like something you'd make in some emerging market country, but one of the reasons, every year at the annual holiday, the employees, maybe 100 million Chinese, get in the trains and they go west to the village. And every year, 20 to 25% of their employees did not return. So the employees found another job, they found a girlfriend, they did something. So for some reason, they didn't come back. And can you imagine in your company if one day of the year, 20 to 25% of the employees are gone, you've lost the ISO training and the process training and all the things that you've done to try and get away from those quality issues that Ian was talking about. You've now lost that in 25% of your people, and now you're scratching to find more people from somewhere to get things going again. Mori is a printed circuit board company in the Chicago suburbs, and they make large circuit boards for Caterpillar, Deere, people like that. And they were getting a housing from China, and they had a severe quality problem. It must have been very difficult between them and their customer, and the customer insisted that Mori find a U.S. source. They found a U.S. source. They fixed the quality issue, but as a secondary benefit, they reduced their inventory of the component by 94%. They reduced it by a factor of 18. And 18 is extreme. I wouldn't promise that to anybody, but there's many cases of reshoring, many published cases where a factor of 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 is mentioned as a reduction in the inventory. And as hard as most companies strive to improve their turns, this can have a huge impact on the balance sheet and profitability of the company. Whammo is probably my favorite case, and they brought back 50% of hula hoop and frisbee production from China to California and Michigan. And I like this because the frisbee sounds like the kind of toy, again, that would probably be made offshore. And California and Michigan, although wonderful states, are not the least expensive states in the country in which to manufacture things. So if you can bring hula hoops and frisbees back to California and Michigan and be more profitable than when you made them in China, then almost every product that we're thinking about that's offshore has a very good chance of coming back somewhere in the U.S. either today or in the next few years. We have lots of survey results by MIT, by Boston Consulting Group, increasingly by other groups, saying that the larger companies are year after year bringing back more, or more of them are bringing back some of their manufacturing to the U.S. Also, MFG.com, which is a business-to-business portal between buyers and sellers of manufactured products, surveyed their contract manufacturers and found that about 40% of them had done some reshoring in the first 3 or 4 months of last year. In addition, there's lots of surveys. I've got 5 or 6 of them in the last 2 or 3 years showing that the U.S. consumer is increasingly preferring to buy a made-in-USA product. So and why is that? Because the U.S. quality has improved. The auto companies especially have done a good job of improving their quality relative to offshore. So the consumers are more willing to buy a made-in-U.S. product and less willing to buy a made-in-China product. In fact, the Chinese are preferring to buy a made-in-U.S. product instead of a made-in-China product. And why is that? Because there's been so many publicized cases about drywall, baby formula, pet food, it goes on and on. The recall rate on Chinese products in the U.S. is 2 or 3 times as high as for U.S.-made products. This influences people, obviously, and the more that the consumer demands, the more the retailer will offer, and the more that the manufacturer will be able to sell made-in-USA products. So we calculate that about 80,000 manufacturing jobs have been reshored in the last 3.5 to 4 years. So manufacturing employment valued came to a low point in January 2010, and it's up by about 500,000 since then. And of that, about 80,000 is due to reshoring, so it's about 10 to 15% of the total increase in manufacturing jobs. Now, at the same time, offshoring happens. There's no denying that offshoring is still happening, but the best that we can estimate it, back, say, 10 years ago, offshoring was increasing at, say, 150,000 jobs a year, and reshoring, no one had even probably said the word, but probably it was 2,000 or 3,000 jobs a year. So there was maybe a 50-to-1 ratio or 75-to-1 ratio. And today, reshoring is about 30,000 jobs a year, and offshoring is maybe 30 or 50. So we've gone from a 50 or 75-to-1 ratio to about a 1 or 1.5-to-1 ratio. So you might say we've stopped the ocean liner, and now we've got to turn it around and bring back about 3 million manufacturing jobs that are still offshore. So that's my objective. It's going to take years. It took 60, 70 years to get to where we are, and it's going to take a couple of decades at least to get things back in balance. Next, please. So we track the industries that have actually reshored. We use our library, and we search it, sort it, filter it. And so you can see the industries. These are basically NAIC codes industries, NAIC code, which replaced the SIC codes. And you can see the tendency is towards heavier things, appliances, transportation equipment, machinery, things like that. There's not too much listed in the, say, plastics and rubber and fabricated metal parts, but those products are coming in, assembled into the appliances, transportation equipment, machinery, et cetera, as they come back. We track the reasons that the work comes back, and you can see the mix of reasons. So the stated reasons are generally hard, sort of bean counter reasons, like wages and currency changes, quality, freight cost, delivery, the kind of costs that go into the total cost of ownership and are realistically the biggest pieces. You can see down in the bottom a little bit of thought on burden on staff from travel and midnight telephone calls, political instability, personnel risk going to Mexico, something like that. Different things for different countries. Green considerations. Now, I think some of those factors are more important than the data shows here, and those factors tend to drive the company to say, let's rethink this, let's do the analysis. And when they do the analysis, they find that the numbers have changed and that it makes sense to bring the work back. The majority of the work is coming back from China. And why is that? Because the majority of the offshored work is in China. But you can see there's still a portion coming back from the other major offshoring countries listed here. Because this has impact on the economy, Washington has been quite interested. The Commerce Department has 4 websites that link to ours. The one at the bottom in the big font, this ACE tool. ACE is assess or measure costs everywhere, and I worked on it with them, and it has 20 pages maybe of charts and data and comparisons of various factors between the U.S. and other countries that would be useful when you use our total cost of ownership estimator or any other means of comparing the economics of domestic versus offshore. Back in January of 2012, I was sitting in my office and I had 2 calls from Washington. One was this U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, the other the White House National Economic Council. Both wanted to know how to bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. And I said to myself, wow, if I'm going to get 2 calls from Washington in one day, better these 2 than the FBI and the IRS. And fortunately, it was these 2. So they resulted the next week in my participating in the insourcing forum at the White House. So you can see President Obama there with his left shoulder towards us in the center, and I'm the bald guy in the glasses who's speaking to him. And at that point, I was giving him some suggestions for the State of the Union message that was coming up in a week or 2, and he had me email them to him, and my suggestions did not make the cut for the State of the Union. But it was still a pleasure to be there in the White House and have a chance to present my views on this subject and what we're doing. And that afternoon, there was a C-SPAN panel in which I participated, and the lady standing is Karen Mills, the head of the Small Business Administration, and fellow runs Master Lock up in Wisconsin. They've done a great job bringing work back. The lady has brought back call centers, and then I'm the bold guy there again, making a point. So it was an honor to be there. So what can you do with this? It's all nice to hear. You can use the tools to source and sell, or source or sell, depending on whether you're in sales or you're in sourcing, and maybe both. Everything's free. You use the total cost of ownership system. You can get the data, the presentations from online. Everything there is for free. You can use our archived webinars. So this webinar, and when Passport has it available, but we've got other webinars on our website. You can pick it up to have your staff, your customers see it, to get them educated on this subject. There are groups around the country that are starting to become more informed on this. The MEPs, Manufacturing Extension Partnerships, that's part of Commerce, NIST within Commerce. Every state has them. They're available out there to help you, and increasingly they're learning about total cost of ownership. You could post a link. If you like what you've heard, you could get our logo, post it on your website, and ask visitors to your website to think about the advantages of sourcing locally. You can call on us to speak for webinars, open houses. Say you're selling to the heavy equipment industry, you might want to get me onto into an annual conference of the heavy equipment industry so I can get them to hear about total cost, and then when you're in there selling your domestic product against offshore, I will have softened them up for you. You can submit your cases of reshoring, where you've decided or where your customer has decided but you're involved. We're delighted to work with you on that. You can get that T-shirt I mentioned. And we're looking for a large, or say at least reasonably visible U.S., I'll call them a poster company. So I've got a number of small companies that we've worked with, but I need a more visible U.S. company that will utilize our methodology, find it helpful, and be a reference for us so we can carry that credibility on to other companies. So if any of you want to do that, or if you have a customer you want me to help you convince, I'd be happy to do that. Now, at some point you have to face a decision about investment. You're probably doing your budgets right now, or maybe you've just done them for next year. And should I invest $500,000 in new equipment here, or should I just source that product from offshore? And on the first blush, you might say, well, right now it's costing me, like in that case I presented 100 here, and I can get them over there for 70. And then you say to yourself, can I automate enough? Can I do enough lean? Can I do enough training and employee engagement to get our cost here from 100 down to 70? And well, you might be able to get 30% out of labor, but you probably can't get it out of material. So you say, can I get 30%? Probably no. I guess we ought to have it done offshore. But if first you measure total cost for offshore versus domestic, and And as in the case here, you see it's 108 here and 98 there. Now it's only a 10% difference. Then you say, can I automate? Can I invest? Can I automate? Can I train? Can I engage and get 10% or 15% as opposed to 30% in the case of price? Can I get 10, 15% out of total cost? And the answer is probably yes. And so the return on investment on the investment of equipment, automation, labor, what have you, just went up dramatically if you use the correct metric in doing the analysis. I mentioned skilled workforce before, and I'm passionate that this is a major subject. Many companies make a lot of their decision on where to locate a factory based on skilled workforce availability. If you don't have the good people, enough of the good people, you can't automate, you can't do lean well, you can't do all the things you should do. So the Department of Labor called me down to Washington in September of 2012 to help them understand what had to be done to get the manufacturing workforce ready for reshoring. And I started off by telling them that the Department of Labor was significantly a cause of the shortage. And so they were polite, they didn't throw anything, but they said, what do you mean? So I pulled up their Bureau of Labor Statistics website, and it shows the chart that you see here. And the chart shows number of degrees and income, just that's all there is to determine success. And I said, are you responsible that we have the workforce we need? Yep. Are you responsible for the apprentice programs and the certificate programs? And they said, yep. I said, well, your chart here should say education and training pay. And in addition to having the average incomes of various degree levels, you should have the income of the average apprentice graduate, or the person who's gained 5 or more certificates in the manufacturing fields like welding or machining. And they said, you're right. And so they, a couple months later, changed the heading, added some comments at the bottom about apprenticeship and certificates, and they're doing a survey to gather the data on the average apprenticeship income. So I was pleased to have actually moved Washington a little bit towards what needs to get done. They're very hospitable, and I appreciate it. Next. So just some real quick ideas on skilled workforce and things you might take back with you. I think one issue is the trades and vocations image. It doesn't sell to the parents, to the student. And in Switzerland and Germany, it's the tool-making profession. It's the precision machining profession. It's the plumbing profession. Why is it a profession? That's how they're well-trained, and that's how they make their living. And so I'm gathering organizations, educators, schools, trade associations, companies to start using the term professions instead of trades and vocations, so as to have an image that will allow the recruitment of the people we need. Another reason that it's hard to attract the students, as I mentioned before, that they're afraid that there won't be any manufacturing jobs for them after they get their training. So I'm asking various localities to collect and report in the media the local reshoring cases, of the week, of the month, what have you, to get them into the newspaper, into the local television station, the radio, et cetera, so that the student, the guidance counselor, the superintendent, the parent, all say, wow, that's interesting. 5 years ago, it seemed like everything was going offshore, but now a lot seems to be coming back. Yeah, that makes sense. Why don't you look into becoming a toolmaker or a precision machinist and get on the wave of what's actually happening? So we're a not-for-profit. We have 41 sponsors. And at the highest level, you see AMT. They put on IMTS, the 100,000-person machine tool show at McCormick Place every September of even years. SME, Society of Manufacturing Engineers, also have been very, very supportive of us. DGS is our marketing agency. Excellent people if you need a good marketing agency. Gardner Business Media puts out Modern Machine Shop, mold making technology, and other related manufacturing magazines, and websites, etc. They've been just great for us. My old company, GF Agi Charmy, EDM high-speed milling machines, and then a range of other trade associations, machine tool distributors, machine tool companies, And next slide, still, further group of them. And we're honored to have all these people supporting us. The one I find a very interesting U.S. bank, fifth largest bank in the country, and in addition to being a sponsor, they'd like to hear from companies that need to lease equipment to enable the company to reshore. So they've opened their ears and they want to hear about that and see if they can help you get it financed. So I'd encourage any of you that have that need, considering reshoring, need equipment. I encourage you to contact U.S. Bank. You come to me and I'll put you in touch if you want. That's not a guarantee that they'll finance you, but they're happy to listen. So this is meant to represent the little Dutch boy in Holland, and he's standing in Holland on the ground, and the dike keeps the North Sea, which is higher than Holland, out of Holland, and therefore you can grow crops and you don't get flooded. And so the little Dutch boy is walking along in the dark, and he sees a little hole, and the water's coming out, and the little stones are coming out, and the big stones are just starting to shake a little bit. And he says to himself, wow, this is going to go, and it's going to destroy the village. So I could run and get help from the village elders, but by the time I get back, I think the dike's gone and it's history, and it's just nothing to eat for a year. Or I can stand here and put my finger in the dike and hold it all together, keep the dike from collapsing, and hope that tonight the village elders find me here in the dark. And so the idea here is that that's the U.S. and that he's standing in, and the area at the top, that's offshoring, and the little figure, that's Harry, that's I, when I had hair, and you are the village elders. And so if you take this and say, well, that's Harry, that's nice of you to do that, and it was a good presentation, and I hope you enjoy your retirement, then probably offshoring gets worse and reshoring doesn't continue to boom. But if you take this back and use it at your company for sourcing and for selling, if you encourage other people in manufacturing to reevaluate and see if it might be in their interest now to bring some of it back, if you encourage the smart students that you know to consider a career in manufacturing, then we'll push back offshoring, we'll motivate reshoring, and the U.S. will be a better economy and society for your children, your grandchildren, and your neighbors. So I'd love to have your help with this, and again, everything online is free. Just take advantage of it. If you have a case, call me for help. Talk to me. I'm happy to help you over, online from here and on the telephone. So I'm looking forward to your questions now and in the future,
Yes.
so we can do this together.
Harry, thank you so much. That was just an absolutely compelling presentation. Without further ado, I'm going to unmute the line so we can begin to address any questions. Just one moment. All right, the lines are open if we have questions for Harry. I know I have one for sure. Harry, I know that there have been many efforts to revitalize manufacturing. Could you discuss and say why the Reshoring Initiative is different from those?
Yeah, there's been there's hundreds of manufacturing groups, and some of them have done great jobs. So I don't want to denigrate them, but there's a tendency in a lot of groups to talk, to write articles, to do that, where we see ourselves, we believe we're accurate in seeing ourselves as acting, that we collect the data. Others do something. No one does that on reshoring. Others do in other areas. We cheerlead, to get people to think about this, but we provide the tools. We enable the companies. We go out and help the companies to make the decision. So we see ourselves as more of an actor, and rather than just a talker in this regard.
Certainly the statistics you've gathered, the case for the one child only in China, it really presents a dramatic picture of the fact that it's not that there are people there even available, where we in the U.S. do have the people to fulfill these roles. Okay, well, do we have any other questions?
Yeah, this is Dave. Hi, Harry.
Yep.
This was something I've been following for a while, and it was fascinating. I really appreciate what you shared, and I'm amazed at everything you've gathered. And the tool set is going to be extremely useful as far as I can see. But I have a question. You showed a lot of companies. I'm sure there's many others. But do you have how many of the smaller, sort of the Tier 3 manufacturers are aware or have taken part in this type of thing, or even know it exists?
Yeah, I think at the management level, the owner, the sales manager, the what have you level, I think most are aware. There's been so many articles about it. If they don't read or listen to anything, then maybe not. But if they're pretty attuned, I think they've heard of it. Again, MFG.com survey said 40% of the job shops, the contract manufacturers in machining and mold making and so on, had done some reshoring, so they knew they had done it. The biggest challenge is really I find the big companies to get them. The president, the supply chain vice president, is getting a big bonus for the purchase price variance savings from offshoring, and to get them to let's say it's harder work to automate, do lean, train and engage your employees, hire better people, and cut the costs here. That's harder work than it is to just find somebody offshore to do the work, and yet it's the right thing in many cases for the company. So it takes a real mindset change to convince those bigger companies, and to me that's the challenge. The little companies, the suppliers, they knew over the last 20 years that the big companies were making a mistake, but they couldn't convince them. And so we're here to help those little companies do that convincing, but between us or amongst us, we need to get the attention of the companies that are offshoring and get them to at least listen.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Hey, Harry.
We
It's Ian again.
Hi.
The question I have actually comes back to the educational aspects of that you were discussing in the presentation. Are in your experience over the last few years, are you seeing a shift in the way we approach educating for the trades or the professions?
The professions.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'd say we're getting marginally better. I'd say the bad news is I still occasionally hear about a quote vocational unquote program being shut down somewhere, and that's unfortunate. On the other hand, the President Obama has been very assertive in supporting community colleges for skills training. He's pushed hard for certificate programs like NIMS. That's been very good. NIMS credentials being awarded this year will be on the order of 10,000 credentials awarded, just in milling, turning, grinding, EDM, tool making, that kind of thing. And it's been growing 20 to 25% per year for the last 3-4 years. So, and partially that's because they're getting into states and areas where they hadn't been before, but it's also, I'm convinced that it's also that more students are being trained. And there's some excellent documents. If I had to convince a local community that they should be putting more resources into this kind of training, there's an excellent report from Harvard's Graduate School Department of Education. I think it's Pathways to Progress. I think is the name, and so it's coming from the ultimate liberal arts education institution, Harvard Department of Education, and it says we're making a big mistake by not training more people to have these skilled professional jobs. And so I'd get that and I'd put it in front of the superintendent and say, please read it. These are your own people that you respect so much talking to you.
Well, that's a great point.
Yeah, actually,
Wonderful.
locally, just as a comment to that, locally here in New Hampshire, there's been a lot of emphasis on that. Even in the area I'm in, and the community colleges are pushing hard, and they've got backup from local manufacturers. They've got backup on the state level. The state economic folks are doing a lot to try to
that's, again,
present
one reason why I think
programs.
reporting the cases of reshoring gives you ammunition. It changes the attitude in the community. Because these training programs aren't cheap. It's relatively inexpensive to have an English teacher with 20 kids, whereas if you have a machining program or welding program, you probably have a instructor with 5 or 10, and you have hundreds of thousands of dollars perhaps of equipment, maybe millions of dollars worth of equipment, as opposed to a blackboard and some chalk or whatever they're using in the English program. So it's much more expensive to train these people, but the return for the individual, I've calculated that if you compare an apprentice program or an associate's degree in machining to an English major, that the return on investment, both for society and for the individual, is about 6 times as high with the apprentice or associate's degree program versus the bachelor's degree in English.
Interesting.
Question of getting people to listen, yeah.
Well, yes. Well, okay, we're approaching our hour mark, but are there any other questions while we have Harry captive? All right. Well, I'm going to kind of call it at that. I'd like to thank you all for making time in your busy workday to join us. Harry, it's been a privilege to hear this. We are so grateful for your time. This webinar will be available shortly on our website. Harry will also have a copy. Harry's contact information is available here. If after we finish this webinar you suddenly think of a comment or question, I know that you can certainly reach out to Harry to follow up.
Yeah, Robin,
I'd like to toss out one question if you guys don't mind, and this is a question that I'm looking for longer term feedback on. And you will have our email address in the invite that you got when you signed up for this thing. You can respond to that. I believe Robin will receive that and forward it to myself. As the manufacturing product manager at Passport, I'm curious. Harry and his group have worked on developing a nice set of tools to help you, to help your vendors or your customers or whatever, to look at some of these things and to try and make better decisions, which, I mean, heck, for anybody who's dealt with me, that's what we're trying to do within the manufacturing application. The question I pose to you is, would you see applicability of having something like that available either directly within our application from the menus or maybe as a link from our application to the website where Harry has this stuff out there? You can email the answer in. You can, when this thing closes out, it's going to ask if you have any comments. Feel free to drop it in there. Contact me directly, Robin directly. I'd love to hear your feedback on that.
Excellent.
One of the thoughts in that is that if it was built into the ERP system, it could extract some of the data from the ERP system, from the accounting system, from the quality system, rather than having you have to search it out and put it into our system, which is in effect a spreadsheet. So the idea by integrating it, that my hope would be that companies would be more likely to look at if getting the TCO was free, as opposed to having to do some work to get it, then companies hopefully would be more likely to use it and make better decisions. I think that's what you should think about when you try and answer that.
Well, certainly a very interesting topic. Our email address, just to have it handy, is psi@pass-port.com, and it will be in all of the WebEx information and your invitation. Well, for all of our guests and our presenter, Harry, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to seeing you at future Passport presentations.